You have queued up the Roulette Tapes, a program of adventurous music and conversation recorded at the New York City Concert Hall, Roulette. You can hear thousands of concert recordings from Roulette's past and present and find news of upcoming events celebrating innovation and imagination at roulette.org. Aren't you curious?
Welcome to another episode of the Roulette Tapes. I'm Susan James. I'll be your host for this edition. Today we feature the work of violist and composer Jessica Pavone. We'll hear samples of her live performances from the Roulette Concert Archive as she discusses her history as a composer and her current project for string octet and two soloists. We'll hear excerpts of her CD release concert from 2019's Brick and Mortar, a section of her song cycle, Hope Dawson is Missing, and other projects. First, Jessica Pavone in duet performance with guitarist Mary Halvorson. Enjoy.
My name is Jessica Pavone, and I'm currently an active violist and composer. I started playing music as a young child, I was just always drawn to the sound of the violin. I don't come from a musical family. Nobody in my family was a musician, but I started asking for a violin at the age of 3. Don't know why, and it was just very persistent request, and sometime around age 5, my parents signed me up for lessons, and I just studied music throughout. Like, I can't remember ever not studying music. I started on violin, then I picked up piano, and I switched to viola when I was maybe in junior high, and then I also started playing upright bass in high school. So I've always had like a very curious, really curious about learning a lot of different instruments. It took me a while to sort of settle into what I wanted to do, and I feel like that's actually kind of representative. All of those concerts you just mentioned, representative of like all of these different things I tried and approaches I took to music before settling into where I am now. I did go to the Hart School of Music in Hartford in the mid-90s, and I studied viola in music education. Worked as a school teacher for a few years and moved to New York, and then worked, I started composing at that time. I didn't start composing music until after I had finished school, and I started working with a composer-musician collective that I had befriended around that time that was based around Wesleyan University. I had met Anthony Braxton sometime in the late 90s, and there was a really fertile community of students who had just graduated, who were around my age range, kind of sticking around Connecticut, not sure what the next move was, and we all just got together every week. We had a group we would all write for and play each other's pieces, and I had always wanted to write music, but I didn't understand that as an option, and my school was very conservative, and the departments were very segregated, so I didn't really have the option to write music or take a composition class, because there was such a plethora of requirements just to get my degree that I was consumed with. So I sort of came to composing and improvising on my own after I was free of the music school situation, and that's really when everything opened up for me, and moved to New York shortly after, and just was working as a musician, and at that time figuring out what, where my creative voice lied, so I feel like the first 10 years of me composing and putting groups together, and a lot of those bands that you mentioned, and concerts that I've done at Roulette dating back to 2005, was also like an exploration in me figuring out where my voice is, and how to write music. Like that concert you just spoke of in 2008, that was just that project, that Pavone show, was a result of me sensing that I was consistently writing for the same instrumentation, writing for strings, and I wanted to write for other instruments. So I created a band that consisted of winds and rhythm section, and I played bass, and just to expand what my capabilities were as a composer. And at that point, which was all self-taught, around 2007, I did go back to school. I went to Brooklyn College, and I got a degree in music composition. Yeah, and then life just continued on after that. Some other concerts at Roulette, there was a tricentric orchestra concert in 2015 that I had written a piece for. I started around 2013, 2015. I had gotten some commissions to write for larger ensembles, and at that point I had written for tricentric orchestra and for experiments in opera for chamber choir. And then some point around 2017 I focused back on string instruments, and I feel like that's where I am now, and that's where my work has been for the past 5 years. So that's sort of a long-winded trajectory of all the places I've gone over the past 20 years, but I feel like it's all important and informs, every step. So sometime around 2012, I had suffered a pretty severe injury and I wasn't able to play music for a little while, and so I had a lot of time to think about all of the work that I had done up until then, because I started maybe writing music around 2000, between 2000 and 2012. A lot of trial and error, a lot of putting groups together, figuring things out, learning by doing, and there was kind of like a very abrupt halt to that. And at that time, I thought a lot about the fact that my earliest and my first relationship to music was playing an instrument, was playing the violin. That was the first experience I had had. So I just started thinking about what do I love, what is it about playing the instrument, what even in my development, what always attracted me to it, and it really was the feeling of playing an instrument. I enjoy the tactile experience, the feeling of playing music with people or alone. It was never necessarily about like the repertoire that I was given to perform. It was more about I enjoy the physicality of playing this instrument. And from there, when I started getting back into playing, a big part of my practice has always been long tones. So that was the first place I picked up again, and I just played long tones, and was instantly reminded that how much I just enjoy that feeling of just having the vibration in your body, under your chin, zoning out to long tones, just focusing on the quality of the sound of the instrument. And from there, I started to develop solo music, solo language, and just thought, what is it that I enjoy to play? I enjoy playing things that are repetitive. I enjoy playing things that are textural. I enjoy playing, sometimes there's a rhythmic motive, a melodic motive. But I did start to develop solo music then, and what I liked about solo playing too is I didn't need to depend on anyone. I could play a concert wherever, whenever. I can go anywhere. I did a lot of solo tours around that time. I could just travel by myself. And in doing a lot of solo concerts, what's different about solo music is that the other projects I had worked on, even if there were elements of improvisation, there's always a score. I was always notating because I was presenting the work to someone else, and that's the language which I know to communicate. And writing solo music, I wasn't necessarily writing notation out. I would write like notes to myself, or I would decide how long a piece would be and what I would be filling it in with. So maybe a piece is 8 minutes long, and you live in this sound for 2 minutes, and you live in that sound for 2 minutes, and another texture for 3 minutes. And so when in solo performance, I started using a clock and timing myself just to make sure I didn't rush through my ideas, because there's a different element of nerves when you're playing solo, because you're very hyper aware of the people I've worked on that, you're the only performer, there's nobody to bounce off of, so it really depends on you to time yourself. So I started using a clock, a digital clock, to time myself, to make sure the pieces were the right length, to make sure I didn't rush through things. And they were all kind of based on this sort of time-based structure. And so after 5 years of creating solo work like this, I still was composing music. Like I said, I had written an orchestra piece and a choir piece. I was still writing music, and then it kind of occurred to me to sort of take the approach of writing my solo music into an ensemble. And so I created an ensemble of 4 string players, which I sort of adapted some of those time-based ideas. But the scores aren't entirely time-based. I still use notation and sometimes play around with alternating between the two within a piece, so that there is freedom for the musicians to explore in a space, but there is still enough of a structure that the piece has a form and a definitive beginning and end, and an identity. Okay, so Hope Dawson is Missing is a song cycle that I created in 2010 and 11 with the support of the Emerging Artist Grant, the Jerome Foundation Emerging Artist Grant. And there was a preliminary work that happened before that piece. This is some of my earlier string writing. I had somewhere around 2007, I started writing I wanted to write for string quartet. I was really interested in song cycle, the idea of song cycle, and I put together a quartet of violin, viola, cello, and double bass. And the project I did before Hope Dawson is Missing was called Songs of Sinistry and Solitude, which was violin, viola, cello, double bass, and then with Hope Dawson is Missing, I augmented that ensemble. I used the same players, and the idea was the bass player could be part of the string quartet, but also part of a rhythm section, so I added guitar and drums. So the bass player was sort of the pivotal musician between the two separate ideas, and then I had a singer because I had written lyrics for that project.
Yes, the liar who invented the liar invented the liar so he can serenade and persuade.
Coming up, Jessica discusses her current project, Lull, a composition for string octet and soloists in 4 movements. She discusses the project and the concert coming up at Roulette.
So as I was speaking of my solo music earlier and how I started to develop it for ensemble, the first iteration was for a string quartet of 2 violins and 2 violas. And again, the way I augmented the string quartet for Hope Dawson is Missing to the larger version, it was kind of a similar approach where I had been working with an ensemble of 2 violins and 2 violas, and I had an idea to augment the ensemble and add the lower strings. So there's now 2 cellos and 2 basses, so there's 8 string players. And also, since solo music and my personal relationship with my exploration of my instrument is such an important part of my language, I decided to invite other solo musicians who work in that way with their solo language to be soloists in in the piece is 4 movements, and the 2 middle movements were written around the language of the soloist that I had chosen. The first being Brian Chase, who's a percussionist, and the second is Nate Woolley, who's a trumpet player, both of who have body of solo work that I've admired for a long time. They're both friends and colleagues, and yeah, it just made sense to me, almost like to make almost a concerto, like to play on the idea of a concerto where there's a string ensemble with a featured soloist, and the solo movements are highlighting their virtuosity, but in this case, the virtuosity is their language that they've created. So I did meet with them, and a big part of what we talked about before I wrote the pieces was I wanted to know their favorite things to play in their solo language, and I also wanted to know what felt good. So in working with Nate, what is your I based the entire piece for Nate around one pitch, but I asked him, what is your favorite pitch to play on the trumpet? And let's work with that, because I firmly believe that playing music should feel good. Not always. I mean, there's definitely, it's good to challenge yourself, but unnecessarily contorting ourselves to create art, which happens a lot in the classical tradition, it's kind of negatively affected how I feel about creating music. So I wanted it to feel good. What are your favorite things to do? How does it feel? And then I designed, it was a nice challenge for me to write around someone else's idea. It was a form of collaboration.
You're listening to a concert from 2019, the Jessica Pavone String Ensemble. The work of violist and composer Jessica Pavone, one of the artists featured in the Roulette concert calendar. The work that we've heard is all from the Roulette Concert Archive. The Roulette Tapes is a production of Roulette Intermedium. This project is made possible in part with support from the National Endowment for the Arts and the Grammy Museum, and has been named a 2021 Webby Award honoree. Our executive producer is David Weinstein. I'm Susan James. Thanks for listening.
You have been listening to the Roulette Tapes, a program of adventurous music and conversation. This series is produced by Roulette Intermedium. You can find thousands of concert recordings from Roulette's archives and news of upcoming events at roulette.org.